Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Before we start, I just want to do a quick acknowledgement of country. So I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today on the webinar. Okay. So, without further ado, first thing, as usual, this session has been recorded. We do that so we can send a copy out afterwards so you can refer back to it. Also, as usual, microphones and cameras are turned off just to help keep any background noise. However, we do have the ability for the chat and the Q&A, which we really encourage you to use to put in any questions you have. A colleague of mine will be helping with doing the questions at the end of the session, so we'll be monitoring the chat. Any questions that we don't get to, we will compile and provide written answers to at the end of the session as part of the follow-up materials that we send out afterwards. After the session, we'll send out that information along with a link to the recording and a bit of a text document just summarizing some of the key themes that we've talked about. Very quickly, I just wanted to do a quick bit of information about MyIntegra. One thing I wanted to call out specifically was our new budget calculator, which we continue to make improvements to. It is a really good bit of a really good tool that we've put together that will help people like yourselves to help build a budget on behalf of participants, which can be exported and taken to planning sessions or to have conversations with participants. We're really proud of it. We're continuing to make changes to it. If there's anything that you would like to see added to that, or you think might be a good feature, please let us know. Some of the features include the fact that it's private. Like I said, it's downloadable. And you obviously have this location-specific information, so it will apply depending where the participant is. And you're able to build a budget for the old system and the new PACE system as well. So if you've not seen it, please give it a go, have a look at it and let us know what you think. Finally, just some contact details there for MyIntegra. We would love the chance to be able to support you or your participants if there's anyone that you're working with that's looking for a plan manager. Please feel free to reach out to us through the channels that we have here. Also noting that we have a SMS channel as well, which may be of interest and may be really helpful for some of you who are constantly on the go. Okay, that's enough about from my side. I just wanted to say a big thank you and a welcome to Elisa, who's joining us here today from Communicorp. Today's session has been really popular, by far our most popular registered webinar. So we think that's an indicator of really interesting content, which should speak to you and help provide some key strategies in the work that you're doing. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll hand over to Elisa now. Please use the chat function and we'll come back at the end and go through what we've got. Elisa, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it. So let's see what we can cover in the next, say, 24 minutes for you, and then obviously finishing off with some Q&A. So as Rob mentioned, I'm a psychologist. I've been a psych for 28 years, always organisationally focused, but I have clinical experience and exposure as part of that. I've also worked with long-term unemployed, done assessments on people for DSP, etc., and I've worked in with people who have been, working with NDIS as well. So that's enough about me, but I work for Communicorp Group, which is a sister organisation to MyIntegra. So we specialise in psychological health and safety in the workplace and everything that impacts on that, which is pretty much everything in an organisation. So strategy, systems and processes, reward and recognition, organisational change, etc., but also a lot of external factors as well. And very much taking an early intervention, preventative approach to those factors that have a flow-on effect to psychological health and safety. So it is very much in our wheelhouse to do strategic work, to look at all the people practices and redesign things to help create not just safe but flourishing workplaces. We also do proactive wellbeing coaching as well, so people can get individualised insight into what is going to help safeguard their well-being, specifically with the type of demands that they do in their work. And we also do capability uplift as well in terms of formal skill confidence development programs for people to meet the requirements of their roles and manage those demands that can be sometimes a bit of hazard to our well-being at times. We have worked with lots of different organisations over the years and have worked and won awards from everything from managing cumulative trauma through to transformative HR practices and so forth as well. Some of those areas there in terms of the frameworks that we have helped to develop for government are freely available as well, so something to maybe look at later. Housekeeping, well, participate in the chat as we go through. I do ask, though, that you are safeguarding confidentiality when you do so. We're not naming names as such, but we're also thinking about the level of detail that we share. So we're not actually vicariously traumatizing other people by jumping to some of the nitty-gritty, potentially traumatic or distressing aspects of what we're talking about. Clearly, in the remaining 21 minutes that we have for the actual presentation itself, we will not be having a break in that time. But I do encourage you to stand up, stretch, do what you need to do, depending on how your day's been already, to manage your fatigue, because sitting down can be quite fatiguing, of course, as well. And again, this is for you, so you can use that Q&A section, which will be monitored, and we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So we're going to be talking about what are some of the reasons for the challenging interactions that we might actually have. Now, the reason it's important for us to look at that is, one, when we understand what's driving the behaviours that we're being exposed to in our roles, it actually lessens the distress that we feel when they try and make it maybe personal, maybe express their view, maybe take their view or their emotions out on us at that time. It helps to safeguard us afterwards to help be able to understand what was driving that behaviour, even though they're trying to make it personal at us. But also it helps us maybe appeal to them when we're trying to de-escalate them, when we understand what's driving that. Self-management and self-regulation strategies are going to be absolutely key in terms of safeguarding our own well-being, but also making us more effective in our interactions with people who may be more emotionally charged or distressed or even aggressive. We're going to be talking about some of those during your interaction de-escalation strategies, as well as what if someone makes a threat of suicide, or we think someone might be at risk of suicide. And then a reminder to look after ourselves, which means about keeping our boundaries. And that's important that we do that as well, because otherwise it's hard for other people to navigate those boundaries with us if we're not clear on our boundaries with them, and self-care. So without further ado, challenging behaviour can be a lot of things. It could just be low-level counterproductive behaviour, or it could be overtly aggressive, violent or threatening behaviour. It could be a combination of aggressive behaviour and distressing behaviour, or more that you're dealing with someone who's more distressed only. I'm sure many of you have seen in your interactions someone start off really aggressive or angry and then maybe end up in tears. Maybe the more that you've acknowledged them, they've ended up in tears in the same interaction. So it's not unusual to see all these things. In terms of those common triggers, shame, fear and embarrassment are actually some of the most powerful motivators for aggression, in fact, but of course distress as well. Certainly they might feel some shame or embarrassment. They could actually have cumulative stress. So we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and many of the people that you might be liaising with have had to be advocates, have had to push for everything that they've got to support them, to support their family member, whoever it may be. They've had expectations that have not been met in the past, where they feel like they've had some false promises there. They've had negative experiences, maybe not with you, but with other services. It could be language barriers or cultural differences where, whilst you may not be talking down to someone, if they don't understand the language that you're using, they feel talked down to, and that can be a bit of a trigger. And of course, a big one is a lack of control. That uncertainty is a huge anxiety provoker and can lead to very strong emotional reactions. So in terms of exploring those reasons for challenging behaviour, sometimes they're actually physiologically aroused. They might be in pain as well. Some people, maybe naturally more emotive in the way that they behave. So many of the people we may be supporting have lower emotional regulation or executive functioning or other issues or challenges that they may have. They also may believe that the behavior they're exhibiting gets them what they want. And that also includes when people make threats to end their life. So sometimes it is a threat that is used to get what they want, and many times and most times it's something that is real for them. And all I've got to say about that is whether it's a threat and it's just a threat to manipulate the situation or not. If they've had to get to that stage, we always need to take it seriously and focus in on supporting them, whether you believe it or not, in that interaction. Because sometimes people, they have had a lot of people who have tried that or used that as a way of getting what they need, and they can feel sometimes, well, it's they probably don't mean it, or they probably aren't going to go through with it. So my advice is always take it seriously. Better to take it too seriously than not seriously enough. So again, they could be feeling a lot of different things that might be motivating that behavior when they interact with us. But also it's important to understand what our reactions are and how this perpetuates maybe the interaction that we're having with them, or the nature of the interaction that we're having with them. So I want you to just self-reflect for a moment and think about when you're having a challenging interaction with someone that makes you feel uncomfortable, or you're anticipating that this is going to be challenging. How do you tend to behave? Maybe share it in the chat function if you feel comfortable too. So one of the things that I do is I overtalk. That's one of mine. It's very easy for people to actually get defensive and say the policy or the approach is, or what you need to do is, and then correct people instead of actually stop and listen and make that person feel heard. So there's different ways in which we might respond. Thank you very much, Vanessa. So withdraw or avoid dealing with it. Absolutely. So sometimes we've got to do an outward bound call, for instance. We might avoid it because we're already anticipating a bit of anxiety and stress in relation to that. We might be putting it off a bit. So again, inward call, you might think it's likely to be that person. We might avoid doing that as well. Stumble over your words. Yep, absolutely. So there's different things that we might try, which is natural because we've got anxiety ourselves. But what we need to do, because sometimes the way that we react can perpetuate that escalation in the person, or may not aid that person in emotionally de-escalating in that interaction. So it's really important what we're doing is to emotionally regulate going into that interaction, and also during the interaction as well. So the quickest way to do that is to breathe. So you might have a hot coffee, tea, Bonox, hot water with lemon. Have you ever noticed that when you have a hot drink, after you sip, you actually breathe the heat out of your mouth? And every time you breathe the heat out of your mouth, you bring your stress arousal level back down, where you can apply all your skills and problem-solving skills, have good situational awareness. You're less likely to think afterwards, why did I say that? Or why didn't I think to say this, etc. Because you're going to be thinking better in the situation. Okay. So again, breathing is one way you might do that. It might be that you just slowly let the air exhale out of your mouth, and just count with your little voice in your head that no one else can hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the length of your out breath. The slower and the longer the out breath, the more effective it is in bringing your stress and anxiety level down. There are a lot of different breathing techniques that I can take you through if time permitted, doesn't today. But one of the ones that also is getting a lot of support is the 2 quick breaths in through the nose and a sigh out through the mouth. Which is very similar to crying. Interestingly enough, our body knows what we need. And if you've ever had a good cry and you feel better after a good cry, even though the situation hasn't changed one iota in that 5 minutes, is because a chemical reaction occurs that increases your sense of calm and restores a sense of confidence that you can cope with that situation. The same thing can happen with certain things like breathing techniques. Fake it till you make it. Fake calm, fake patience, fake the behavior so the mood and emotion can follow. It's the quickest way to change how you're feeling. So when they say, you know, when you're not feeling confident, stand up, strike the, you know, super person, pose or whatever it is. It matters. If you're feeling stuck and you don't know what to do, don't sit and mimic stuckness, get up and walk. In fact, when we walk and do something rhythmical, you become more constructive in your worry and you won't start to spiral unconstructively and get overwhelmed. So you're faking calm maybe with all of your body. What I will do is I'll use the fake it strategy of adopting the behavior of calm throughout my body. But I'll use a grounding technique, which is also an unmirroring technique at the same time, where I'll scrunch the toes in my right shoe, but relax everything else. Now, by doing that, it's not enough for me not to hear what the other person is saying, but it's a slight distraction so I don't over-identify with it and take it on board as much. I can still focus on what they are saying, though. It keeps me in the here and now so I don't get too far ahead of myself, which helps me when I don't agree with what I'm hearing and I want to jump in and correct them straight away. So it brings me back here. So it's a grounding technique because it's keeping me in the here and now, and it's something that I'm physically grounding with in terms of tuning into. Could just be you're stretching a calf muscle, for instance, which is a very grounding, brings you back into your body technique, into the here and now. But it's also unmirroring because the other person's not doing it. Just like sipping a drink, crossing or uncrossing your legs, writing notes is an unmirroring technique. You're not mimicking their behavior. So you don't, again, over-identify in a way that means it will take more of a toll on you, and it helps you to remain calmer in that situation. Not to mention that if you are stretching a limb or you are crunching those toes, as they heat up, you're releasing positive endorphins back into your system that gobble up the stress hormones like a Pac-Man and boost mood as well. So there's different things that we might want to do. It might be taking a break. It might just be doing a time task on your phone, trying to beat the clock, something fun and unrelated, and therefore you're not thinking about work at that time. It could be looking at some green. Being around green accelerates your recovery throughout your work day and after work. So it might just be going outside and maybe looking for a patch of grass near where you work and walking through that maybe for a little while or whatever it may be. Focus on what you can do and acknowledge the things that you can't control and influence. So acknowledge the good intentions that you have, what you did or didn't know coming into that interaction, or what you do know, what you're trying to achieve, and so forth, your good intentions. But think about the things that you can control and influence. Those grounding techniques, you think about it when you're trying to do something physical like stretch or weights or do an extra sit-up or a chin-up. It's very grounding, but what you could also do is just name 3 things or 5 things in the room that you're in right now, or one thing for each sense. See one thing, hear one thing, feel one thing. Okay? Could be a sensory rest in relation to that. A mindful moment, like actually sipping your coffee and enjoying the aroma or the taste. The thought-stopping techniques are like the ones where you're counting the length of your breath. In fact, if you exhale all the air out of your lungs, which is what you should be doing before you start any breathing exercise to make sure your lungs are fully empty, so you're not straining when you breathe in, but you count the length of your breath, because then you can't actually worry and count at the same time. It gives you a break. I will, between clients, go upstairs or up a hill around the block. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as I breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4 if I'm going upstairs because I'm asthmatic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what I'm doing is I'm breathing out for longer than my in-breath, which is mimicking the breathing you do at your most relaxed state when you're asleep. It's the quickest way to bring yourself down. But also going up hills or upstairs or even stomping your feet is actually part of emotional regulation. That means you're not going to do that. Okay, so you could even do an evidence-based, proven time and time again anti-fatigue option, which is 20 to 60 seconds of fast feet. So you're literally doing this on the ground like this. If you're not fully able below the waist or injured, you could scissor your arms. Okay, but at the same time, that extra bit of the feet does help with emotional regulation, but also it's a proven anti-fatigue option, better than going for a walk. Plus, as you feel them heat up, you're releasing those positive endorphins that gobble up the stress hormones like a Pac-Man and boost mood. So seek those people who are your compassion committee that you could seek out and use as a sounding board. So there's a lot of different things that you might do to self-regulate. If there are things that are working for you, share them in the chat so that other people can see some of those ideas. Now, understandably, we have key stages for handling challenging interactions: beforehand, during the interaction, and of course, afterwards as well. So let's think about pre-interaction. We want to know what our triggers are. What are our sort of, things that are our hot spots? Is it that someone who makes excuses, or hasn't done the right thing and tries to say that you're unprofessional, or makes slurs about your accent, or whatever it might be. So again, consider, what are your triggers? How might you manage that? How full is your tank of petrol today? What do you need to do for self-care? And pre-plan that. What's your break in case of emergency self-care plan look like today? And what am I worrying about? Because if you're worrying about something going pear-shaped, you've got anticipatory stress. And unfortunately, anticipatory stress is just as bad as the stress you experience if the thing you're worrying about had in fact happened. So again, acknowledge what you can control and influence, and also what you can't. So again, part of that could be you might be able to have someone there as a sounding board. Do you actually have to have that interaction? Could someone else? Do you feel prepared for that? Do you have some avenues for that? Do you want to prepare how you might approach that by, role playing with your EAP provider psychologist or a colleague? So there's lots of different ways in which you might prepare. During the interaction, you might be using certain acronyms to help manage and de-escalate certain situations. The RATE one is a nice, easy one. The R stands for relax, which means self-regulate, so then you can respond versus react. The A is actively listen, but also acknowledge and assert where we may need to as well. And then with T, thinking, is this working or is this not? If it's working, yes, let's explore some solutions and agree with a plan of action. If not, we might need to engage help. And that could also mean engaging emergency services for someone who is at risk. So we all know what acknowledgement is about, but often we miss the opportunity to de-escalate someone. So here's a key tip for de-escalating someone emotionally. The more emotional they are, aggression or distress, the more important it is for you to acknowledge the emotion, not the content. Because if you calmly rattle off what it was that they were saying in a calm voice, and they're really distressed or anxious or aggressive about it, they kind of wonder if you get it. And so they're going to keep at it until they get a rise in you, and now you know how I feel. Okay? So the more emotional they are, the more you need to acknowledge the emotion. I can hear the frustration. I can hear it in your voice, or the anger in your voice. It sounds as though you're feeling really overwhelmed at the moment and you're not sure what to do next. Or, I can hear, it sounds like you're feeling really fatigued at the moment. And then after you acknowledge, you pause for 4 to 6 seconds, because it takes their brain 4 to 6 seconds to register that they've been heard and understood when they're in an emotional state. And that is what de-escalates them. That is key. Because often we acknowledge and we go straight into the next question or straight into the next phrase. So you've acknowledged, but you've actually missed your golden opportunity to de-escalate someone. So acknowledge, pause. Now, to be honest with you, in most interactions, you would only have to naturally acknowledge and pause 3, maximum 4 times before they will fully de-escalate. Okay? If they don't, they're not likely to de-escalate in that situation. We don't want to use some, inappropriate phrases or less effective phrases either to re-escalate. So really consider what it is that you're actually saying and whether that's creating some false hope or naturally sounding like it's a problem. Because if they're already half tense about a situation, and as soon as they hear, I can't, unfortunately, it's policy. They've half tense, doesn't take much to get to full tension, knew it was going to be a problem, and they're already there. Okay, so again, really consider some of the language that you're using as well to avoid that re-escalation. In terms of A, we might want to assert as well. So an assertive needs-based request is really, really key, particularly when we want to change the nature of the interaction moving forward if that behaviour is crossing the line or very counterproductive. So what you do is you don't assume that they understand or intend to behave the way they are or impact you the way that they are or others the way they are. So you describe the behaviour just factually without assuming any ill intent. You then describe the impact it's having and then a need or preference. When you call me, and just use the words, the exact words that they said, I find it difficult to keep listening. I need for you to stop. So it's red, I need for you to stop when they've crossed the line. It's not aggressive, it's assertive, and it's showing backbone. And often people who are aggressive will only respect backbone. Okay, so it is about asserting where we may need to. If it's a preference, it's not a deal breaker, but I'd prefer it to be different. You know, when you, this is the impact it has, I'd prefer it if. I used this with a colleague who was always late to meetings that he scheduled. And I said to him, look, Kev, you know, I know it's not your intent, but, you know, when you turn up to scheduled meetings 40 minutes late, it means that we have to, you know, recover ground that we've already covered, or we may not get through the full agenda in time. I prefer it if you know ahead of time that you're likely to be late, that we reschedule that meeting or for later, or we do it on the understanding that certain agenda items that have already been discussed won't be covered again in that conversation, which is very specific, concrete, and doable. Another technique is the ABC technique for disagreeing in a respectful way. So rather than the passive aggressive, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. It might be a pan back far enough away from the disagreement to find a common point of agreement. I agree that this is not ideal, or I agree that this is not clear yet, or I agree that this is not what you were hoping to hear, because you may both agree on that. And then you build, and it will also be important to ensure this and this is in the system correctly, so we don't have a problem next month, or so that we've got this and this happening and we don't miss the deadline. And I also noticed that, you know, so you're sharing the considerations, and then you compare. Where I think or where I feel we might differ is, or where I see we might differ is, your concern is, remember, they're not going to listen to you or walk with you towards a plan of action if you don't acknowledge where they're coming from first. Your concern is, whereas my concern is this. How do you see it? Keep it two-way. Don't close it off. Now, this is a technique that comes from Crucial Conversations by Patterson et al. These are evidence-based strategies proven time and time again for emotionally charged, high-stakes situations without sounding pear-shaped. So there's a lot of resources there for challenging interactions. And another one of those evidence-based strategies is the don't do contrasting statement. So what we do is we talk about what we don't or didn't intend if they've reacted differently to how we hoped, and then finish with what we do intend or did intend. So it brings size and scale back to things as well. So it could be a case of, I might say to someone, hey, can we just pause and just talk about what's happening here? It sounds as though I'm making you feel uncomfortable, and I don't want that to be the case. What I do want is to understand more about how, or explain more about, or whatever it might be, okay? And come back to what you do intend. I didn't mean to suggest for a moment that, you know, you've done the wrong thing, that you haven't had good intent. What I do want, or whatever it might, or that I did want to suggest for a moment that I understand what you're going through or how difficult this is. What I do want is to talk about what I can and can't do to assist you with this and what's required to enable, or whatever it might be. Okay. You can use it to call your own behaviour. It might be a case of you say, look, hey, can we just pause? I'm noticing that I'm starting to get defensive, and I don't want that to be the case. What I do want is, or I don't want to add to your frustration, or I don't want to anger you. I don't want to, add to the load that you have at the moment. What I do want is to help or to ensure or to whatever it might be. Use that one in your own time. I use it with my husband when I try and get him to do certain things for me on the weekend, and he's got a big long list. And instead of getting a rant, when I ask him when we can talk about the health fund, I'll say the don't/do contrasting statement. I don't want to add to your plate because I know you've got a lot on today. What I do want to know is when we might get a chance to talk about the health fund, because we've got till Friday, completely different reaction, because I've acknowledged, I understand you've got a lot of things on your plate. State is actually also another evidence-based strategy, which is very, very good for tentatively testing where you've got repetitive behaviour. So you're sharing the facts, okay, without this, talking about your conclusions. You ask for their view, and then you tentatively test. I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps maybe for you, you're not clear on why this is an important requirement, or why this needs to be done first, or what are some of the reasons for, or whatever it might be. I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps maybe 5 very tentative words in a row. In other words, it's okay to disagree with me without shutting down the conversation. So lots of different techniques there, but are very, very useful. And I definitely recommend getting Crucial Conversations. It's a centimetre thick, the book, the easiest language to read. You'll use it in all aspects of your life, but very much when you're dealing with challenging interactions with others, particularly where the emotions are charged. Now, this is just a thought stimulator on the screen now. What I'd like you to do is maybe share with the group some of those things that you use to either clarify the boundaries of your role, or to empathetically refer, or to care without carrying, or to assert your boundaries. So you can see some examples on your screen right now, just as prompts. And I'd love for people to share in the chat the things that are working for them. So if someone was coming to me and using me as their main support, I would say, look, I'm noticing that. This is something that's been really upsetting you. And I realize that I'm not going to always be available within the space that, within the scope of my role. So I'm wondering who else you have that you feel comfortable to talk to. Have you thought about maybe reaching out to your GP? Or I'm happy to provide you with some numbers should you need. Now, if they're not de-escalating and they might be becoming more aggressive or threatening self-harm, we might need to engage in some help. Now, if you're face-to-face with people that might be using some of the natural barriers, making sure that they're not between you and your nearest exit route, making sure that you're at least more than one of their arms distances away, making sure that people have good view of where you are should there be anything that crops up for you, and maybe having a wide stance with 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, because you've got more stability to move and maneuver in different directions if you're standing, maybe with the soft stop hands, which means that you can bring them up quicker if you need and if there's a threat of physical harm. But you're going to escalate much quicker and engage in assistance, which could be emergency services or duress alarms. But if the person does bring up threats of self-harm, we don't want to ignore that. We always want to take it seriously. We might start softly and say, you said you wished you weren't here anymore. What did you mean by that? But you're going to work your way up to asking directly, are you saying you're thinking about ending your life? Is that what you're saying? That's very clear. If you say, are you having thoughts of self-harm? Yes, says the non-suicidal self-harmer who's just looking for release and relief, but is not suicidal. So really be clear on what it is that you're asking. Don't say you're not thinking about doing something silly, are you? Because, wow, that is really open to a lot of misinterpretation. And, you might say at this point, look, I can't even begin to imagine how you're feeling or what this is like for you, but I do care and I do want to help. And that's why I'd like for us to call Lifeline together, or the Suicide Callback Service, or if it's a colleague, EAP, etc. Now, confidentiality. When we have people disclosing safety risks, safety trumps confidentiality every time. And you do not need to tell them that you're going to breach confidentiality beforehand, particularly also if you think that it's going to create a safety issue for you. Now, again, if it's not safe for you to be there or to enter, don't enter until other help arrives. That is security, emergency services, etc. If you have someone who is feeling suicidal, you have someone stay with them physically if they're in the location with you, or keep them on the line until other help arrives. You can also ask some additional questions. CPRI, current plan, has it got to the point where you've thought about how you would do it? P, past attempts, and have you tried in the past? R, resources, and do you have the pills or easy access to them? And I, is this person behaving in an intoxicated or impulsive way compared to usual? Now, if this person is in a highly agitated or distressed state, and you get 3 or more yeses out of those questions, that is a 000 call without delay. Yes, I've thought about it. Yes, I've tried in the past. No, I don't have access to, the resources, and the person's thought about how they would do it. So it could be any combination of those questions. 3 or more yeses, highly agitated or distressed. Distress is the biggest indicator of higher risk. Then that is a 000 call without delay. If the person's down and not agitated or distressed, yes, I've thought about it. No, I haven't thought about how. No, I haven't tried in the past. And they're not acting impulsively or sounding intoxicated, then that's a, hey, have you thought about talking to someone about this? Okay. Maybe considering equipping them with some community service crisis lines and so forth. If they say, no, I'm fine, then you're going to obviously just check in, see if they need to talk to a service just in case, because you've seen some things or heard some things that make you concerned about them. But generally, I have seen people who make that request, that make that threat. Most of them are going to be serious, let me tell you. I did have one where it wasn't, and the person was hospitalised for a mandatory 72 hours and never tried it again. The others, the moment you take that seriously, you stop focusing on the thing that they're asking for. And they're very quick, if it's just deploy, to backtrack because they're not getting what it is that they want. So often it shows itself. So always take it seriously. Better to take it too seriously than not seriously enough. So again, a reminder of some of those community services that might be available in your area. So I'd love to know in the chat function now what people do to take care of themselves after a difficult interaction. What we do want to do is practice some good boundary management. That means having a full life, not over full, not to the point where you don't have time to think, but a full life outside of work, and being really clear on the purpose and goals of your work. Sometimes we have to wear a particular hat for a reason, and we can then understand what important piece of the puzzle that we're playing, even though there's limits to what we can do, and we may cop some abuse at times as well. We need to accept that there's things that may not be able to be controlled or influenced by us, that there's certain things that, we weren't able to influence, and that there may be negative outcomes that were no fault of our own as such. And we also need to be aware of our own unsustainable work practices and be committed to a self-care plan. So thinking about, the 5 fingers that you may have, or toes that you may have, or whatever it is, but 5, something easy to remember, so that, you've got 5 things that you can do from a recovery perspective. So acknowledge the achievement that you got through it. Allow some time to feel what you're feeling without being concerned or judging, and take some time to sort of action what you need to action, and debrief where you need to do that, and to also ground yourself. So I know we're coming close to time, so I will be quick on this and go over to some questions in a moment. But I do want to remind you that when we are debriefing, ask if it's okay to debrief, because you don't know what your colleague has had to cope with that day. So give them an idea of what it is, but start from the outside of the circle and work your way in, low impact debriefing or low impact sharing. So give them the broader details first so they can actually make an assessment whether they're okay to debrief at this point in time with you. Find somewhere private where other people don't have to hear it. Even though they support you and they care about you, it may be compounding for them. And again, take those times to debrief with each other. Check in regularly, have those chats, have some compassionate phrases that you can help yourself, such as "this will pass," "all things pass," "the pain from this moment will fade in 4 months' time," "there's help if I need it," etc. Maybe think about your compassionate committee, what they would say, if it was them, so that you're not too hard on yourself. And do something that gives you a sense of energy again, restoration again. So that could be, cooking, giving you a sense of self-mastery, I should say, over my words, trying to do this quickly. Connect with meaning and purpose, or things that you find valuable. I value generosity. So just filling up someone else's water bottle when I fill up mine is an act of generosity. Just saying, not just thanks for that, what difference it made to my day, really is, being generous with feedback. And doing things in line with my values tops my tank of petrol up and makes me recover quicker than others. So have a look at some of these sources of energy on the screen now, and do a little bit of a reflection on what it is that you're doing to top your tank of petrol up after difficult interactions. Now, I have oodles of tips that I could share. But I'll go into the Q&A because we've got about 16 minutes left of the hour, and I wanted to make sure we had time to address some of those questions.
Wow, Elisa, thank you so much. I feel like I've been through something covering everything you've gone through there. I was breathing along with you and everything, so that was fantastic. Thank you. I've put in the chat, but just would encourage you guys again, if you have any specific questions, any situations, keeping them the details general, or anything like that you would like to run through with Elisa, please put them through the chat function or the Q&A function. Likewise, if people watching, is there any interest if we were to put together some kind of a training session or course related to this type of stuff, if that would be of interest to you? Have a think about that, put that in the chat as well. We'd be really keen to hear from people. Kate, I can see you've got your hand up. Let me turn your mic on and you should be able to ask a question now. You may just have to unmute yourself, Kate. Maybe you had your hand up by accident. No problem if you did.
Might have been a thumbs up.
It may have been a thumbs up. We've all been there. Okay, I'll just give a minute or two for people to put any questions or comments, either related to the training or if we were to do something similar. Lots of complimentary posts though, Elisa. Thank you again.
It's just the tip of the iceberg. I have oodles of stuff. How do we, even questioning techniques so we don't re-traumatize people or add to their distress. There's lots of different things we can be doing. So don't be shy with asking the questions. We raced to make sure we had time to cater for your questions. So please do come forward with them if you have them.
I think one thing that may resonate with the group here is that a lot of the people, we've got one from Sarah there. What was the book that you mentioned?
Crucial Conversations by Patterson et al. They're 4 researchers that looked at real life people that deal with high stakes, emotionally charged situations without setting them pear-shaped and without having to water down their message and pacify unnecessarily, etc. So really, really useful book. It is evidence-based. That's Rome. So anyone who does anything on difficult conversation skills, all roads lead to Rome. That's the evidence-based research, real life, tried and tested, replicable results, not just nice theories that we often hear about. These things work in practice. So if you haven't read it, you can apply it to all aspects of your life, whether it be with your kids or whatever it might be. Please, I do actively encourage you to read it if you're interested in managing your own anxiety, but also being able to de-escalate situations and enhance the working relationships at the same time.
Sorry, what was the name of the book one last time?
Crucial Conversations.
Crucial Conversations.
Yeah, I might just, if you just, you'll see it on Dimix or something similar there. But there's also great online summaries that you can find as well. But I actually think the book is easier. It's the online summaries are very, very dry. But look, what I'll do is I'll just quickly paste I'll paste into the chat.
Thank you, Sarah.
Just a hyperlink to one of the online summaries. But the book is much better. It's much better because of the examples it gives. It's so good. It brings it to life. So I'd prefer, I read that and go, oh, whereas the book I couldn't put down, you read it in a night.
Right. Well, we'll include that in the follow-up content. Jill, I can see you've got your hand up. I'm going to take you off mute. And maybe you do have your hand up for a reason. If you want to take yourself off mic, then you're welcome to talk. One thing, Elisa, I was going to ask was, I think a common situation that many people on the call may be going through at the moment is a situation where we're working with participants who are getting difficult news from a third party, the government, who it's not necessarily because of anything that we have done, but they've received, information that they may not be able to do something they thought they were able to, or that their plan may be getting reduced, that type of thing. And that can obviously lead people to be in a very high stress environment. And I was wondering if there was any advice for working with people in that situation where we are not the cause of the stress, but maybe on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that's you're not being the bearer of that news necessarily, but if you are having to give bad news at any stage, foreshadow it. So if anyone has heard of Chris Voss, which is the ex-FBI negotiator, he has heaps of YouTube videos. One of the ones you'll see is Tactical Empathy. But he talks about foreshadowing news. When you foreshadow news, it actually means that when the person hears the news, it activates less pain centers of their brain. So it actually has less of an impact on them emotionally. So whenever you're the bearer of those news, make sure you foreshadow it first. Then it is about acknowledging. The thing that when you acknowledge it, they progressively de-escalate. They need to feel heard and understood. I could be working with someone who, in a clinical setting, that believes that there are aliens in the PowerPoints at the back of the room. And I can acknowledge that I heard and I understand not how they feel, but I understand what they're trying to say to me, that they believe that there are aliens in the PowerPoints at the back of the room. And I can see or hear how they might be feeling about that, how exhausted and distressed they are working around that fear every day. Now, I'm not agreeing that there are aliens in the PowerPoints at the back of the room, nor am I trying to debate it with them or fix their worldview. I'm acknowledging that I heard what they're trying to say. Now, that is what de-escalates them. That's the thing that actually makes someone feel better. Trying to make them feel better, well, at least this, and you should all, when we try to reassure and make them feel better, it doesn't make them feel better. Them feeling heard is actually what makes them feel better. There's a chemical reaction that occurs, which is like the crying one, but on steroids, and it actually aids them in being able to de-escalate emotionally and think practically what is it that they can do in this circumstance, and so forth. But that acknowledgement piece is going to be the most critical thing that you can do to help bring that person down. But you do also need to assert. If they are taking it out on you, I can hear how frustrated you are.
Yeah.
But when you say, I am an effing this and that, the incompetent fool, and you're going to go to today, tonight, I find it really difficult to keep listening. I need for you to stop. Yeah. So we need to assert to change that behavior. If you're face to face, just that kind of pause with that slight raised eyebrow makes them actually go, oh, and they realize how they've come across. Or just asking them, is there another way that you can rephrase that for me when they're going off it about it? And just so I can understand exactly what it is that you're saying. And it gets them more into adult to adult mode, less emotional and reactive. Or, look, I can hear how upset you are. Would you like to take a moment just to have a sip of water? And it means they have to get back in control of themselves. So there's different things that might be able to be used as a bit of disruptor.
Great. Thank you for
There's
that.
lots of things we could talk about on that question.
That's fine. I have finally, the Q&A on my screen wasn't showing initially, but it is now, and I can see we've got a few things there. So apologies, we will get through as many of these as we can and provide write-ups to questions on here. I'm just going to pick up a couple for you, Elisa, if that's okay. One, Simon, who is asking, have any of the study strategies mentioned here been proven to be effective with neurodiverse individuals? Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much all of them. What we don't want to do is like, oh, that's right, or no, like no sudden movements or abrupt changes of voice. Just slow it all down. Don't eyeball people. Often it's the sideways figure of eight when you are glancing at them. You're sort of looking away, and then you're glancing at them and you're looking away, or have something that you can actually be focusing on between you, so that you don't have to be doing the eyeballing aspect of things. But that acknowledgement piece is absolutely critical for them. And if they go into silence, look, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. What I do want is to understand, what are some of the reasons for thinking this, or what are some of the things that are concerning you most, whatever it may be. So there's different ways in which you might do it. I'll self-disclose. I've got I've got 5 family members, so 2 stepchildren, 2 children, and a husband that are all neurodiverse. And as you know, and that many neurodiverse friends, including fellow psychologists as well. And with neurodiversity, it is diverse. So you can have people with exactly the same diagnoses, and they're different from each other. There's a full spectrum there. So it is about thinking about that. Don't do contrasting statements to your friend, because you may actually find someone reacts in a way that you didn't expect, and then you can re-clarify your intention there. That's going to be really, really key. You've got to watch your body language, because they're very, very perceptive and intuitive sometimes. And if that doesn't match, they're going to have that passive stubbornness kick in. So there's different things that we might need to do. But if you're concerned, remember, you can use your workplace's employee assistance program to ring up a psychologist and ask advice, not just for yourself, but for what you're doing with work, with your client, about your clients or a difficult colleague or whatever it might be. You can still use those services to get some tailored advice if you're struggling with a particular participant.
Excellent. Really interesting. Thank you. Claire asking, any tips to combat the cumulative effects of moral injury? So burning out since the result of the event caused clients to escalate, are outside of our control, which we kind of touched on, but the cost of living pressure, that type of stuff. Any tips on combating that cumulative effect?
The cumulative effect for you working with them, or the cumulative effect for them?
I'm assuming for them, based off that. Well, you could look at it either way, but I'm assuming for them, but it could be for you as well, for sure.
Okay, so if it's for them, you need to do a trauma-informed approach, which I need 20 minutes to take you through that, but we need to do trauma-informed principles if it is to avoid that cumulative trauma for them. So that's what we need to do for them. If it's for ourselves, it's really, really key that we are wired for survival as a human being. Survival of the species, and that's why we sweat or shiver and shake when our temperature gets too hot or too cold, because if we're in too extreme a temperature for too long, we'll perish. The same thing happens psychologically. So when you've been overstimulated that day, you want to avoid stimulation. When you're understimulated, you want to look for stimulation. We want to get to that equilibrium again. So the more you've had a big emotional load on you that day, because emotions are contagious, we absorb it after a while, yeah? The more you're likely to do a passive recovery strategy, which doesn't use up any more of your energy after work, but it doesn't replenish it either. You feel like you have reduced your stress level. So basically, if this is the height of your stress up here on the slide, and you've relaxed on the couch and just done nothing, you feel the difference between the peak and the trough, and you feel like you've relaxed, but you haven't relaxed fully to your set point. So you're more vulnerable to the stresses of the next day, and therefore more likely to go into a passive recovery strategy that doesn't use up any more energy. Phone, TV.
Yeah.
But it doesn't replenish it. Same thing. So this is what burnout looks like, and that's why it actually sneaks up on you. So we need to do an active recovery strategy. So this means, if we can, thinking about the research-informed principles, the evidence-based principles that we know for micro acts of recovery throughout our day to avoid the cumulative effects. So one, when you get exposed to distressing stories, you need to debrief ahead of time whether it's affecting you or not. So you processed it and it's not even there to be triggered off later on, because you don't know if something's impacting on you until you externalize it by talking it out or writing it out. So you break it down, talk away, file it away, and it doesn't come up again. So that's the thing that we see protects people from cumulative trauma the most. So it's really thinking about those proactive approaches to what we do. It could be the 10-minute break in the first 3 hours of your workday accelerates recovery throughout your workday. And if you then also have shorter and longer breaks, that means actually having lunch, not doing work at the same time, it accelerates it even further. Seeing even a picture of green accelerates your recovery. But if you can get out into a green environment, 20 minutes in a green environment doubles your T cell count and improves your immune system's ability to fight off colds, flus, and viruses. And you feel more able to cope when you feel well than when you feel like you're holding something off. 30 minutes boosts mood. We need 20 minutes of natural light every day to regulate our sleep at night. 30 minutes boosts mood. So getting into a green environment in natural light, maybe debriefing with a friend or listening to something that makes you laugh or connecting with your fur baby or whatever it is, you've got 4 evidence-based strategies in one 20 or 30-minute activity, which will be better than 5 hours on the couch with Netflix and a Domino's pizza. So again, it's about us looking after ourselves and building in micro acts of recovery. When I go up those stairs between adversarial interactions, I'm really present when I come back down and I'm in that next meeting. So, it's just about, I might say something, a phrase that's really upsetting me and annoying me, that someone said to me, and I'll say it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, then it becomes a jumble of words. So it starts to mean less to me. So there's lots of different things that we might be doing. It might just be that hot drink, remember, throughout the day. Those little micro acts are the things that make a difference, so that things do not accumulate for us.
Great response. Thank you. Right, we have about a minute left, so I don't know if we've got time for another question. There was couple of things I wanted to call out. Lots of people responding to my question about training and a lot of positive responses, so thank you for that. Really appreciate that. The other thing was we have a question about asking if you have other workshops that you'd like to recommend. I thought it was a good chance for you to just plug what you're doing at Communicorp.
Sure, absolutely. Look, obviously it sounds like if it is about, cumulative trauma, that you'd have, obviously, trauma-informed practice would be a great one for people to build on. We do actually have a whole workshop on working with distressed and vulnerable clients, which is slightly different to a lot of the content that I've done today. So there's that. There's also managing exposure to sensitive matters, which again has some more protective evidence-based strategies in there. But it is about focused recovery sometimes as well. How do we maximize our recovery and restoration activities to really safeguard our own well-being? So it could be a variety of different things. So we run all sorts of workshops, and certainly we can, they're not going to all be captured in it, but we can give that to Rob in terms of one of our brochures to send out as part of the post-workshop.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to end it there. We've got record of all the questions. We'll send stuff to you as follow-up. Thank you again for everyone for attending, and thank you, Elisa, for your excellent presentation. Have a great Christmas if we don't speak to you beforehand, and we'll get a new one ready for the next year. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.